Hey, thanks for tuning in. Anthony Louis and Corey Dowds have joined me today to talk about horary astrology. I think, Anthony, you proposed this talk and we have specific example, but I'm sure this talk is not just going to be about that one particular example, and we're going to mix or see how both Western and Eastern astrology are taking us to one same result at the end. So thank you so much for joining.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
The reason I proposed this talk is that in the summer I was asked to give a talk at Kepler College on Antisha, and I was looking for a good example, contemporary example. There's a lot of, in the literature, older ones. And I've been following Corey's website, and he, just as I was looking, must be synchronicity, posted a horary that had a lot of antishal connections, but he was approaching it from a Vedic point of view rather than a Lily Western point of view. So I thought it would be an interesting discussion to look at the same chart from the 2 points of view and see what they have in common and see what one might add to the other and vice versa.
Okay. So, I think the crux here is that Corey is completely into Vedic Prashna Marga and Prashna techniques of classical Vedic astrology, while Anthony, you follow the traditional medieval horary techniques from Persian and also William Lilly's stuff. So,
Right.
but as we were discussing offline, it's almost amazing and astounding to see that how both these both Indian and Western traditions help us arrive at similar results. Corey was talking about how he was astonished about William Lilly. So,
Yes. I wanted to say something in the beginning. Thank you for having me on too, Ashwin.
Okay, cool.
And I think this is my first time on your channel, right? I wanted to say real quick, some of you may have learned this when you read the Prajna Tantra of, this is by Nilakanta, but B.V. Raman translated it. There are specific orbs of aspect of planets to be interacting in Prajna. For example, Saturn has an orb of 9 degrees and, Mercury is 7 degrees. I was astonished when I started reading this William Lilly book, Christian Astrology, and he has the exact same orbs even given down to the degrees. And so it's like you were saying, there is really so much in common with these two systems that we need to start talking to each other and kind of interacting and learning from each other again, like we did in ancient times,
Yeah. I think it makes
Lilly's primary sources were the Persian medieval, Persian Arabic, and I think Nilakanta also used that tradition in his approach. So they had the same sources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This was what I was also trying to say. So Nilakanta did not live in the exact time when Persians transmitted this their form of astrology. I think not everything of Persian astrology was transmitted to India, but the annual predictive methods and horary methods were pretty much transmitted to India. But that was far before Nilakanta's time, because Nilakanta lived sometime around end of 15th century and early 16th century. But before that, I did a video with Martin Ganston on origins of Tajika, which is pretty much from 9th century and 10th century texts, which were essentially of Abu Mashars. So we are talking about a technique that got transmitted to India, which has its origins at around 9th or 10th century. So at around 12th century or early 13th century, there was a person called Samarasimha. There is a paper that Martin Ganston has published elaborately. I think it's around 55 to 60 page paper, which only talks about the origins of Persian astrology into India, especially Tajika. So we are talking about Tajika Nilakanti. So I think we are missing the link somewhere between 13th and 15th century in history, but as Anthony said, it's pretty much there from Abu Mashar. So, and William Lilly was also drawing heavily on Bonatti and other Latin and Persian texts, which essentially was, the starting point was 9th century, if not the actual Hellenistic period.
Right, because those books came into Spain from the Arabs, and they were then translated into Latin and made their way to throughout Europe. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, Anthony. I actually have an ancestry that's connected to the that Spanish and even the last name Dowds comes from, it's Irish, but it comes from Odow, which was literally meant black, or Duda, which meant black. So the Black Irish and there was a lot of conflict between they battled the Muslim, the Moors, and they were going back and forth. So who knows, when we talk in India, we say that, you probably wouldn't get so into this as a young man like me unless you had some ancestral karma or some sort of connection. I also wanted to mention a quick point. I think I touched on this before we started recording, but William Lilly, from what I understand, he was kind of very self-educated, and he inherited a lot of money, and he inherited this big library. So he must have certainly, like you guys are saying, he must have certainly had not just this text, but probably all kinds of other, Persian, Indian texts, all kinds of stuff. Who knows what he had, but we know that he found so much of the same ideas working, because when he went and made his, major text, Christian Astrology, it's really, if you do Prajna Vedic astrology like me, you can read this book easily. It's not hard. It's the same ideas just being conveyed.
But I actually went the other way. I first was introduced to William Lilly, and then I started B.V. Raman's. So
that's cool. And you're Indian.
Yeah. So I mean, things are always happening from the other side for me. So
yeah.
So his ancestors were in Ireland. So
maybe I'm also. I might have to get a reading from an evolutionary astrologer to find out where my origins were. So Chris Brennan just, I think, recently did a video with Nina Griffin on William Lilly's life. If I'm not wrong, I think it's Nina Griffin. I'm not wrong, I guess. So where he goes into all these details of what are all the texts that William Lilly had access to, especially because of his wealthy inheritance and so on, that William Lilly did not have much of trouble in terms of financial capabilities. So I think he had a lot of access to Latin texts, and his Latin was pretty good, and his Greek was not as good as he would have liked. But I just came to know that his Latin was fantastic, and he had access to a lot of Latin texts. I think Bonardi's texts were in Latin, so it must have been probably accessible to him at least. And by the time of Bonardi, almost all of medieval Arabic texts were translated to Latin. So it's almost we are easily able to find the links of how Nilakanta came about doing Prashna Tantra. So there must have been some influence.
So all right, so Anthony, do you want to try to start going into showing the chart, or?
Well, maybe I should say a little about Antisha, since you weren't familiar with it.
Yeah.
Because the techniques are very similar. So let me pull up my slides. I won't go through all of them because I have a lot for that talk that I gave, but just the basic ideas.
I attended that talk actually.
Let me see. I hit share, and where are my slides? Oh, here we are. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so Antisha, the idea is that symmetry is really important. This was a Greek idea. They were big into mathematics and symmetrical relationships. So what this slide is, it's simply, I used stellarium, and this is what the sky looked like in Alexandria, Egypt in 630 BC. And I chose that date deliberately, but I won't go into detail. And so this is the spring equinox, the March equinox, and it's at sunrise or sunrise or sunset. I can't remember. Well, I put the solstice on the meridian. And so you can see the crab is right in the center. And then what they noticed was that certain signs were symmetrical. So if you leave the crab in the center, the lion is symmetrical to the twins. Virgin is symmetrical to the bull. The scales are symmetrical to the ram. And they considered those symmetrical relationships highly important and significant And basically they thought that if 2 points on the ecliptic had the same declination above or below the equator, then they could, quote, see each other. That was the idea.
Ah, okay.
But if then they were opposite sides of the equator, but with the same declination, equal but opposite declinations, they could hear each other. And so they use this in synastry. Now, what happened with precession is that the solstice moved to the beginning of Cancer. And then by the time, like around 0 BC, when the Hellenistics were at their peak,
Mm-hmm.
Cancer was then symmetrical to Gemini, Leo was symmetrical to Taurus, and so on. But this is kind of where it started, just looking at the sky and seeing the symmetry and saying, if they're the same elevation above the equator and they're equidistant either side of the solstice, they must have something in common.
Okay.
And so with that, the idea of aspects is aspects allow signs or planets to see each other.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an alternate way of seeing. You don't not just need an aspect. You can see each other if you're at the same height above or below the equator on the ecliptic.
It reminds me of this idea of Rashi aspects in Vedic astrology, but it's not the same thing, but it sounds similar. But yeah, okay, keep going.
Yeah, so, and since I was curious if there was a similar idea in Vedic, and I happened upon, this I stole from Ernst Wilhelm.
Mm-hmm.
There's an idea called Vyatipata, which I know nothing about, but what got me, this is in his book, Classical Muhurta.
Okay.
But if you look at here, it's the same idea. If the sun and the moon are exactly the same declination above the equator, but opposite sides of the solstice, then they have this relationship, which in Vedic astrology is considered really bad, unlike in the Hellenistic, which is considered favorable. They're seeing each other.
Well, I guess if this is in Muhurta, who knows? Maybe it's just something for Muhurta is like
Right.
for the, like electional. Yeah.
And it only applies to the sun and the moon here.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, they have weird rules about sun and moon, you know, with electional stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and you don't even want to have the moon with any planet in a sign as a rule in Muhurta. I don't know. Yeah, it's really weird.
But maybe the moon is getting overheated or something because it's across from the sun. I don't know. But what struck me is this is almost the same diagram we use to explain Antisha.
There's also these, there's some weird declination-based techniques. Those aren't fresh in my mind at the moment, but there are also some relocational techniques that use declination. I don't know if it would really relate to this or not.
Well, the idea is really symmetry. You have an axis that's important, like the solstice axis, and points that are equidistant either side of the solstice have this symmetry, so they have a connection that is not apparent otherwise.
Okay, I have a question, and you may be about to answer it, but did those anti-scions change over time? Like you were saying in the ancient times, the Greeks had them like this. Are they now different?
If you use tropical, no. If you use sidereal, obviously because of precession, the solstitial axis keeps moving. Right?
But the normal Hellenistic people would use these same ones that they were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, because basically it's symmetry. If you fold the chart in half on top of itself along the solstitial axis, the left half will fold on top of the right half, and the points that line up are the anticial points.
Okay.
Okay, so it's just basically symmetry. It's very much like the idea of midpoints in modern astrology. Like,
yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to go through all of this. Here's just so you can see what we're talking about. If this is the Earth, this is the equator here. Here's the ecliptic. A point here, equidistant from the solstice to a point here, will have the same declination above the equator and will be symmetrically equidistant from the solstice, and so they're anti-scions.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Or here's just a graph saying the same thing. This is the equator. Here's the summer solstice. Here's the winter solstice. So if you draw a line across 2 points on the same line or the same height above the equator, they're antiscia. But this point, say here, if we go as far below here over to here, is the contra anti-scion. This point would hear this point would see this point. That's the idea.
And that's has something to do with like the shadow, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big discussion, but basically they looked at the shadow the sun cast, and certain days of the year that there would be equal shadows, and those were the anticial days.
Right. Okay.
Okay. That's how they would measure it. So here's the idea, here's the solstices, and the signs look across at each other. They
See, that's what reminds me of the Rashi aspects, is that in this old book, the Jaimini book, it says that right in the beginning, it says this very cryptic sutra that says, in front are seen the Rashis and at the sides. And like no one would understand what that means, but because Rashis were already in part of the oral tradition of India, everyone is like, oh, that means in front are seen the Rashis, like the Rashi aspect, they go to the front and to the side. I don't know if you know Rashi aspects, it'll make sense.
I know.
I was kind of having a conversation with Rob Kortnik on the same sutra.
Okay.
And yeah.
But the idea here is you look across the equinoctial axis. Aries looks at Virgo, Taurus looks at Leo. But Taurus will hear Aquarius because they're equidistant across this axis.
Gotcha.
Aries will hear Pisces, Aries will see Virgo. Pisces will see Libra, Libra will hear Virgo. So, and so these are the traditional Western aspects, the planetary aspects. So that's one way of seeing. And then here's my diagram of Antisha and contra Antisha. So the monkeys look across, here's 0 of Capricorn to 0 Cancer. That's the solstitial axis. And this is the equinoctial axis. So if you look across the equinoxes, you see the sign, that's the Antisha. But if you listen, the signs up here, hear the signs down here that are equidistant. Okay. I think the idea of hearing is a lot.
So is it,
it's like a resonance. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but is there is it safe to say that all the fixed signs hear each other?
Yes.
Okay.
And see each other. Well, they see each other across. Aquarius sees Scorpio. Scorpio hears Leo. Leo sees Taurus. Taurus hears Aquarius. Actually, this is a lot like the Rashi aspects, isn't it?
Yeah, it is kind of similar, but it's like probably a little for a different utility here, a different use for this.
And just to make it a little clearer, here's the Earth, here's the equator, and if a lot of globes will have the ecliptic on it, so the ecliptic like comes from down here, rises and goes to here. And so signs above the equator, if they're on a line of latitude, have the same declination, and so those points are Antisha, and if you go vertically, you get the contra Antisha.
All right, yeah, that makes sense.
So now to get to your horary. So I made some notes from Lily on how he would analyze it. So on possessions, Lily says that you use the second house for what you own. That's your goods.
Right. Yeah. In Western, they use the second. But just so anyone who's listening, if you're doing the Indian prajna, you want to use the fourth house for lost objects.
Right.
But there's a little bit. I understand why they would say second, though. It makes sense. And I've also experimented with second. It seems to work pretty well too.
Lily also uses the fourth.
Right. So yes.
He also uses the moon as a general signifier for anything that's gone astray, because the moon wanders around the sky so much, whether it's a person, a fugitive, or something that's lost. And he also takes into account the part of fortune. But his key significators are the second house, its ruler, and the moon.
Yeah.
And then the Hellenistic tradition, unlike Vedic, does not use the fourth as the thing, but it uses the fourth as a location of the missing thing. Makes that distinction.
Yeah. Okay.
And so Lily used the fourth as the location of the missing out. And this is a quote from Lily directly. The second house and its lord and the moon signify the goods or thing lost. Blah, blah. The fourth house and its lord signify the place where it is laid.
That might be more accurate, honestly. I don't know. That's interesting. That it might just be that.
Lily's sources for this are the Hellenistic texts, like Dorotheus says the same thing, that the the fourth house cusp is really what he calls the cardine under the earth. It's the southern, not southernmost, but the point deepest under the earth, the nadir.
Huh. Yeah, the Prajna Tantra texts don't maybe even get really specify it that much. So,
well, I looked it up, so I'll show you the quotes in a second.
all right, yeah, okay.
I did my homework.
Okay, good.
There it is. I went to Nilakanta and looked up the fourth house.
Okay.
So these are quotes from him now. This is the Raman. The fourth house rules tracts of land, places where plants are thrashed, tracts abounding in vegetation, which is really relevant to your horary.
Yeah, I think this is the thing that has been used traditionally, where fourth house relates with land and all those things. But I think I've always used second house with belongings and possessions. So
yeah, treasure troves. So treasure troves are places where treasure is stored.
Right. That's the real reason. Like, that's the real reason you're using the fourth house. Like, if you read somewhere else in his book, you might not have the sutra pulled up, but he basically explains that in the old days, you buried your money. You're like your fortune, you still do that a lot. You buried it. The fourth house is the buried, you know what I mean? The deep ground, like the where it's burrowed. And also the fourth house is like our attachments. What makes you happy. It's like your precious thing. You know what I mean? So whenever someone's going to really go out of their way to pay money to you for something, to know where something's at, it's like often not like a second house commodity, because those are liquid possessions, like, money, cash. It just kind of comes and goes. But fourth house is more like my precious, you see, my laptop is a precious like commodity, a fixed valuable thing. And, the fourth house has to do with like fixed wealth, like a car, a property, a house. It's not liquid like the second.
exactly.
Does that make sense? So I totally could see using like the second house. I can totally see it, but I think it depends. Like, we should be very intelligent. If you're asking like, where's my lost gold? Then if it's buried, then it's in the fourth. But maybe if it's your credit card, it's maybe the second house, maybe, or something.
I think if it's buried, it could also be in 8th and 12th house. So
maybe so.
So the treasure trove is where you hide your treasure, and crevice is a place you stick something in to hide it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And in this stanza, the place where the stolen article is kept will be appropriate to the nature and sign of the fourth house.
So maybe there's not any disagreement there then.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're drawing on the same texts. I think the difference is in the Vedic tradition, they've come to use the fourth for the actual object that's missing.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really make a difference if you find where it is, you'll probably find it.
Yeah, I think it's really good to know about that distinction, though, because there probably are times where in prajna you should use the second, maybe, other than the fourth.
Okay, so let's continue. I don't want to have to. Lily makes a big deal of what type of house the significator of the second is. Why in the fourth also, but he's mainly talking about the second. So if the significator of the missing object is angular is really visible, nearby, easier to find. Succident is it's a little harder to find, not so close, maybe it's hidden. Because succidents correspond to the fixed sides, things that want to stay in place, they don't want to move. And cadent in Hellenistic is really associated with being far away, going on trips, being harder to find because it's at some distance. And so Lily says it's probably distant from the querent, may have changed places, been misplaced while traveling, may be hard to find. It will need persistent effort or repeated inquiries and searches to locate. So that's an interesting principle of Lily's.
okay.
Getting back to anti-sign.
I think in Indian astrology, it's, they use the, if it's a movable sign, fixed sign, and Indian B.V. Raman's text uses the fixed and movable nature of the particular.
Yeah, they're similar.
Sign.
They're not the same, but they have similar connotations.
Yeah.
And then John Frawley, who's a modern Horary in the tradition of Lily, he talks about anti-scion contacts with house cusps. He says that a planet's anti-scion, that's its reflection across the solstitial axis, acts as if it were the planet itself. So you can interpret the anti-scion as if the planet itself were in that location.
Okay.
And it carries a sense of something hidden. So it shows you something hidden. Okay. So here's your laptop horary. Okay. This is, I cast the chart in Regiomontanus, which is what Lily used, just to see what Lily would say.
Okay.
So here's how Lily would interpret this chart. And then you can do the Vedic. He would say the querent is the first house, same. Mercury is the querent. Mercury's up here in the 11th. That's probably good. It's a nice house. Probably means it was a woman, right? That
Yes.
may get it back. The missing object, the laptop, would be ruled by Libra Venus. Venus is up here in the 11th Regiomontanus house. Lily didn't use whole signs, but I always look at both. So it's in the 11th, but it's also in the 12th whole sign. So it's not going to be easy to find. It's it could have, because it's in the 12th in Leo, it could have been moved. It could have traveled because the cadent houses have to do with travel.
Right.
And but because it's in the 11th Regiomontanus, she may get it back because that's a house of acquiring things. The moon is also a symbol of the lost object.
Right.
And what's really good here is that the moon is moving toward Mercury, her significator, and Mercury is retrograding back toward the moon. So they're moving toward each other. So she and the lost object are coming together, and it's in the 11th house, and the moon is quite dignified because it's in Cancer. So she's going to find this thing.
Yeah, and wouldn't you agree that I think that any system of Prajna astrology, that right there, I think we would all agree. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's a astronomical, like undeniable kind of thing you could see there. Yeah.
So then Lily would say, where is it? Well, where is it? We have two clues. One is Venus is in Leo, and it's in the 11th and maybe the 12th if you use whole signs. Leo tends to be outdoor locations like parks and gardens.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And where you might find animals in a sunny area. Okay. And Leo, being a fire sign, it could be in a fiery location, maybe color of fire.
Right.
But then he would say the location more specifically by tradition is the 4th. And so that's Sag, and the ruler of Sag is in the 4th. So it's going to be in a 4th house location.
What would that be though?
But that could be a garden. I mean,
oh, right. Yeah.
Because
right.
the 4th is, as Nilakanta says, places abounding in vegetation.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But it could also be in something related to Sag and Jupiter. I would never have said this, but knowing the answer, it could be near a library.
Right. Yeah, I know. And it's funny because, man, I mean, this girl's going to love this video because she studies astrology and studies Western too. We were talking about that, and I did think library, but it wasn't enough to really it's funny how with Prajna, you might guess a couple different things.
But if you use the anti-scions, the library shows up more clearly.
Oh, because of Gemini or something?
Because the axis here is 0 Cancer to 0 Capricorn. So the moon is one signifier of the lost object. Its reflection across this axis is over here in Gemini. So it could be in something related to Gemini, which could be books.
Gotcha.
The second house ruler, Venus, which is Lily's most prominent ruler for the missing object, is here in Leo. And its reflection will be here in Taurus, which is in the 9th house, libraries, churches, places like that, universities.
Yeah, I was thinking the university library.
What? I'm sorry?
I was thinking of it as university library because there is a lot of 4th and 9th connection involving Mercury and Venus. So,
but it's in Jupiter, Taurus, so it could be in a garden near a library.
Yeah.
And so, actually, I think I did this was just my, here what I did. I took the original chart and put the anti-scions on the outside, just so it's easier to see.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the original chart in the middle. The moon moves up here. It's in Gemini in the 10th house, so maybe some public building. It has its anti-scion over here in Taurus, but in the 9th house. So
Right.
library, maybe garden.
That makes sense.
And Venus is very near Gemini, so it could be near books. And it could be in a sunny location. And it's probably hidden because of the combustion.
Yeah, so that pretty clearly does point that out.
Oh, the other thing, Lily, would to notice the combustion here. Venus is combust.
Right.
Which
yeah,
means
well,
it's
okay,
hidden.
yeah.
You can't see it. There's something hiding it.
Sure, yes.
It's in a hidden location. And then Lily would say, at least in Western, the 11th is your benefactors, people who help you out, your friends, your benefactors. So the moon is a benefactor of the querent, and a benefactor, someone who's looking out for the querent's best good, is going to go to her and help her find it.
Yeah,
So
I think the basic idea can also be like when the significator or moon is directly related to the 11th house or 11th lord, in most of the cases, the last item is probably found. So,
right, but Lily would say specifically in this chart, the moon could be a person who's going out of their way to help the querent because it rules the 11th cusp.
Right, yeah.
And the moon happens to be directly opposite Saturn, so that pulls Saturn in. And the anti-scion of the moon is here at 14 of Gemini opposite Jupiter. So what it's opposite is contrast sign. So the moon is hearing about Jupiter and hearing about Saturn because you got hearing across this axis up and down, and seeing. If you go anti-scion, it's seeing. If you go vertically, it's hearing. So the moon is hearing about where the missing object is and hearing about this Saturn person. And the moon is in opposition to this Saturn person. So has some kind of interaction with the Saturn person that they then convey to the querent. And also the moon itself is opposite the anti-scion of Jupiter, which happens to fall on Saturn. If you look this way across the solstitial axis, the anti-scion of Jupiter is on Saturn, the anti-scion of Saturn is on Jupiter. So there's a very close connection.
Yeah, what does that mean?
It means that whoever this Saturn person is sees where the laptop is hidden.
Oh, right. Because the laptop is Jupiter, it's that 4th house, and it's
it's a location of the laptop.
Right, or either way, right. So if I was reading it, I would say that's the laptop's Jupiter, but either way, it's the place where it's at.
Right. So whoever Saturn is knows where the laptop is, knows its location, and can see its location.
Yeah.
And the moon is going to find that out. It's going to hear about it, and then it's going to go to Mercury and say, "I heard about this Saturn person who sees and knows where your laptop is, and I'm telling you about it." So that's how Lily would interpret it.
And that's very similar to what happened, basically, right?
Right.
Okay, cool.
The other thing is, because Venus is in Leo, which is it's actually the 12th house cusp, it's really a cadent sign, and so it's going to take repeated attempts to find it. It's not going to be simple. You're going to have to go back and search again and again. You won't find it the first time you look.
To me, that makes sense because the cadent houses relate to the dual signs of like Mercury and Jupiter, which requires such a human type of intelligence. There's like, okay, like Virgo, I need to go in here and tweak this a little bit, or maybe I need to ask them again or check back up. Or
right, and doing it at least twice to find it. Yeah.
Right.
So basically, that's what I had to say. I thought it was interesting. Do you want
That's really cool.
go through the Vedic approach? Because
that's really cool. I think I had one more question too. I'm always curious about that, like the good daimon and bad daimon idea. And so the 11th house, I think Asha was touching on that a moment ago, how in normal Vedic astrology, there's a general rule that if the 11th house is good, or the ruling planet's going to the 11th, or it has Jupiter or Venus there, then the person will like overcome, or will get the thing, you know, they'll
Right.
be a positive outcome to like their overall dream. And so that sort of is what I don't know. Did you see that also happening there?
Well, yeah, I think that's the moon approaching the Mercury, that somebody who's really trying to help you is approaching you to help you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the good diamond is basically your guardian angel.
Ah, okay.
That's the idea. If you know those pictures, they have the little angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other.
Oh, that explains it like so much more clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, I've like gone and like read like long articles that try to explain what the
good
diamond is.
the good spirit that guides you through life, and the bad diamond is the one who's trying to screw up your life.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And the idea comes from Plato, the Timaeus, his dialogue, where he talks about how after there's the myth of air. Do you know that myth?
Myth of air.
Basically, very, very simply, this soldier dies and his soul goes to whatever heaven is for the Greeks. And there's a waiting period where you're going to reincarnate, so you have to wait. And then when the time comes to reincarnate, you're paired up with a spirit, your daimon, your good daimon, who helps you select the time to be born, so that you can come back to Earth at the proper time to learn the next cycle of lessons you have to learn. So the good diamond helps you pick your ascendant and the arrangement of the planets.
That's wild.
Yeah, and then that diamond stays with you throughout life and guides you, so you work out your, I don't think Plato used the word karma properly.
But same idea.
But it's your guardian angel that helps you both select the time to be reborn into this incarnation, and then stays with you through your lifetime, and then guides your soul back to the afterlife when you die. That's your good diamond. So he's always there helping you out and trying to keep you on the right path, so you do the right things you're supposed to do in this life. And the bad diamond is sort of his enemy, who's
the devil on the shoulder.
Right. I want to screw this. I want this guy to come back as a cockroach. I mean, to screw up his life.
Gotcha. Okay, interesting. That's cool. That is helpful for me because I'm not a Greek philosophy expert, you know. So, all right. Do you want me to? I can just keep using this chart, or perhaps
sure. Well, it might be better if you have it to use your Vedic chart for people who don't know the round chart.
Okay. Yeah.
This might be
okay. You'll have to stop your screen.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Let me.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
How do I stop sharing?
No, I just stopped it. Don't worry about
it. Did you stop the sharing?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
Now I should be able to do this. You guys see this?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So, you know, I've already done a video on it, so you guys can watch, you know, viewers can watch that on their own. But so basically, I would say the exact same thing about the ruling planet being Mercury and going to the 11th, you know, and the significator. That's a really good indication for the 11th house is like gains, we say, but the same idea of like the good daimon, I guess, or this type of thing. And Moon, the Lord of the 11th, is applying to it, right? And Mercury is retrograde, going backwards. So, and we actually kind of normally just ignore Rahu and Ketu until the end. I like to look at them, but in the traditional Tajika books, they never really talk about that. So I keep them in mind, of course, and I don't ignore them. But I usually just like leave them alone until I've done all the other normal things. So ignoring that, I see that the 11th Lord is, you know, the gain, and that it's also the Moon, the significator of the querent and the object. And it's coming to apply to that person. So yeah, I think like almost everyone, most systems, most experience with prajna or Horary, they would say, yes, you probably are going to get this thing. But then where is it? How is it? How's it going to work? And I did think about the second house going to the 12th, going, okay, that's not really ideal. You know, for me, just the way I saw it, I was like, okay, yeah, that's not ideal, and it's combust. So yeah, that wasn't ideal. But because of this 11th,
really would say it's 12th house and it's combust, so it's hidden somewhere.
Right.
That's how you interpret it.
Yeah, and that's probably how I should interpret it as well too. I can't remember if I said that in the video, but yeah, the 12th house represents like hidden things, and also having to put more energy in. The same idea as you mentioned about it being a hidden house. The 12th house has to do with expending a lot of energy on things. And she did spend money to, she did give me money to help answer this, not like she just was like, I want to know totally. And then later when I answered it, she was like, I'm going to give you some money for that, because that was nice. But so I guess she did technically expend money on this. The main thing though was when I looked and I saw, okay, that 11th house, it's looking like it's going to be found. So how? And then I saw that the 11th Lord Moon was directly in that immediate applying aspect to Saturn. And we call that a Purna, or a complete full Ithasala, or applying yoga, And that's the exact same system in the Greeks in the East, was the applying, the separating, all that stuff. So I knew that this item is going to apply to Saturn. And so since Saturn ruled the 5th and 6th house and was in Capricorn, a sign of earth and agriculture, and with Ketu, I figured that, yeah, there was probably like a really old person who found it, or it is in a really old and kind of decrepit area, or it can actually, in projects like Saturn, it can be like if it's a lost thing, it can be like in dirty clothes, or it can be in the bathroom, or in some like neglected, dirty place, and then looking at the 4th house, I thought, okay, so the 4th house is going to be, it's her laptop, it's her treasured precious item, this attachment, that she's lost. And then Jupiter was in the 4th. So wow, okay, so that's a blessing. There's, Jupiter kind of protects. Okay, that's another good sign, I thought, right? So the fact that and then the fact that Jupiter was separating from the 8th Lord Mars in the 12th was good. So that meant that whole 12th house thing is not going to interfere. Like, it's separating. Jupiter is retrograding away from that scene. And so then I thought, gosh, I'm forgetting a few of the other details maybe that I mentioned in the video, but basically I came to the conclusion that it must be in the direction. Yeah. I wonder, does Lily talk about the directions of?
He does, but I think he uses different direct. His basic idea is that fire signs are east.
Right.
Yes.
That system, yeah. That's the same. That's what's so confusing with trying to find directions, is that there's like 3 different ways you can kind of interpret directions.
Houses have different directions than the signs, and so it gets a little confusing.
Yeah, it does get confusing. So I don't use the houses when I do this, because I already always use the 4th house. So I can't, systematically, it makes no sense for this technique to use houses. But I do keep in mind the general idea of, if it's the air element, it's the west. If it's the earth element, it's the south, fire, east. But even more than that, I like to use the system where Aries and Taurus rule the east, Gemini rules the northeast, Cancer and Leo rule the north, Virgo rules the northwest, Libra and Scorpio rule the west, and then Sag would rule the southwest. And so that happened to be the actual direction that she found it in, was in the southwest. And that's what I told her because of that, and also because the moon was applying to Saturn, who was in the principal southern sign, Capricorn. And this is another cool technique that I think there probably is in Western, they probably use this as well. But if it's like, if your significator is in an earth sign, then the item is at ground level, or if it's in a fire sign, it's at eye level, or if it's in a water sign, it's below the ground. So I told her that it was likely that a person had it, or and they're keeping it. It's not like underground or not hidden in a weird place. It's at normal level. And I told her that she needs to ask around and look and see, because it looks like a friend, an 11th house person, like another figure, like you said, like a benefactor, is going to help you find this. But the person who has it, Saturn, is not going to want to let go of it. Or basically there is that inimical aspect. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So we knew that because they were in angles to each other, that it was openly inimical. And it turned out that this old woman had found it. she was she was the gardener for this old sort of old area behind the library that was even, I think, had like a cemetery attached to it as well or something, which is even more Saturn, right? So you had
and also the fourth house for Lily is the graveyard.
Right. Yeah. So it was all kind of that kind of vibe. Yeah. I think she also was keeping in like this old rusty tool shed, you know, near the grounds for the agriculture, which would all probably had spider, you know, just a very kind of like dirty, neglected old servant worker kind of shed for Saturn. And the reason also, I should say, the reason I thought that is because oftentimes the planet that the moon is right, like you're saying, what Willie mentioned about the moon, the planet that the moon is right about to apply to your aspect will speak to where that thing went or where it's going, right? And so it seemed like that was the case. So I told her to ask around and see if she knew anyone who found it. And she, so then she heard from this cute barista guy who ran the coffee shop that she goes to that, yeah, this older woman was bragging about this laptop she found and she was going to keep it and all this stuff. And he intervened, like this 11th house benefactor thing. He intervened and said, no, I know whose that is, and blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of how it came about. I think there were, I need to mention this because I forgot to mention the video and she told me to mention it, but the environment was the southwest. I also predicted that it was like an orange environment, and the building was, you know, because Sagittarius has to do with fiery orange colors, kind of like how Lily.
And so does Leo, where Venus is. Yeah,
exactly. So if you, it's perfect, because if you, we like to use Leo as the color yellow, but then if you were to mix Venus and Mars's energy in, it might be a brighter orange, or you know what I mean, or it might be a little bit of a louder fiery color. So I was really happy with that, being even the color being a very fiery kind of color. But there was one thing I forgot to mention, is that she told me as she went to go and find the laptop, there were all these peacocks hanging out at this area. I know. I'm like, what? You're in Portugal? Like, what? I wish I had peacocks all wandering around. But anyways, so peacocks, she told me that. She was like, this must be significant, right? Like in finding it. And I thought, gosh, I think that has to do with Jupiter, I bet. You know, like something about that, because Jupiter was related to, like, you know, it's kind of like this dignified, like somewhat spiritual, fiery, heavenly thing. And the peacock was related to like the phoenix and all these kind of ideas. And so that's sort of like was loose. But then she actually went and looked into some old Prajna or Western Horary books, and they actually said that peacocks are ruled by Jupiter. So I figured I'd mention that.
How long did it take her to find it?
Oh, it did take her over a day, or no, probably 2 days. Yeah. So she was kind of trying harder, and it was not on her first attempt. So that what you said is true as well, because she went, looked all around. Then she messaged me. Then she talked to me about, then she still went and looked. And it wasn't until like what she had told people, then later the next day it got back around to her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Corey, I have a question actually. So did the querent and the person who had the laptop actually met, or the person who took the laptop from that particular places, did they meet?
They did. And yeah, but it was kind of it was somewhat thing. Yeah, it was somewhat uncomfortable and awkward for her, because she had basically heard through the other friends that she was bragging about it, and she was so proud how she got a new laptop, but she didn't even need it. It was really just bragging about it. So it's kind of, so she goes and gets it back, and there was tension.
Okay, but I actually thought that they would probably have not met, because there is no connection between Mercury and Jupiter. So I was not sure. But what I would see here is, I would make complete use of Rahu here, because Rahu in 11th house is naturally, very beneficial to the native, and Moon, which is the common significator of lost items, is actually moving towards Mercury. I would always take Mercury as the ruler of gadgets and other things.
Right.
So Mercury is retrograding back to the Moon, but Mercury is also the lord of the rising sign, which actually indicates the native itself. So in some way, the lost object is actually coming towards the native, and Rahu is probably kind of super facilitating, because Rahu and Ketu work based upon the dispositor's strength and their dignity. So in this
Right.
case, Moon is actually placed with Rahu, and Rahu is, let's not say well dignified, but Rahu is having all the power to kind of snatch
Yes,
it
you're
from the other person. And
that is a very good point.
yeah, and on the other
Yeah.
hand, we have Jupiter in retrograde motion. So at the time when this chart was made, the laptop was lost, and Jupiter was retrograde. So which inherently means that laptop is actually coming towards the native. So
Yes, that's correct, and you make a very good point there. I guess I forgot to say it. After doing all that stuff, then I would look back at Rahu and say, well, yes, Rahu is dignified because its Lord Moon is strong, like you're saying. And I think if one was a very, very good astrologer, just seeing this chart, they would be able to know what was lost and that it was a computer that was lost because of what you say, that the significator is Mercury, like gadgets, technology, phone, laptop, things like that. Moon, a thing you do for pleasure and fun, and Rahu, internet, online stuff, you know? So if you were really good, you could probably have predicted what was lost even without being told that, you know?
yeah, sure. I would have never taken, Venus is almost irrelevant to me, because I look at, I only looked at Mercury, Moon, Jupiter, and Rahu. So it's, so see, the entire 12th house is probably signifying that it might actually be back to the native, but we always have more than the 12th house signification, because 11th house is almost extremely explicit to state that the native is going to get back the laptop in one way or the other.
Yeah, and also it's worth noting that Ketu's Lord Saturn is also quite strong and is dignified as well. So I guess when you do bring in the lunar nodes, it does add to the whole story, and it doesn't confuse it anymore. It definitely contributes to the story. And what you said about retrograde is very true. Retrograde planets are very important in Prajna. I notice I don't always feel like I'm able to know exactly what it's saying, but it always seems to be very important.
Yeah, and if you note, there is almost a Kala Sarpa dosha or yoga in this chart, where all the planets, if you don't look at the degrees, so
Right.
in some way this has given a lot of anxiety and depression to the native for that one particular day. I surely wouldn't be able to predict the number of days it took. Maybe Anthony could do it very well, but it's very difficult for me to say the number of days when the last item will actually come back to the native. But I can just make some rough.
Yeah, I'm not that great at that either.
What Lily would do, he would look at the main significators. And here I'm just looking, the moon is what, at 15, 17. The moon's next aspect actually is the conjunction, the Rahu, which is at 1736.
Yes.
So the difference is about 2.5 degrees. That could mean about 2.5 days to find it.
Right.
On how you interpret Rahu. And
But
then,
what
I think
about,
it's almost just 2.5 days, Corey, is it right?
wait, but what about the fact that the moon is not yet completely aspected Saturn, because Saturn is at 1544?
So that's probably more significant. So probably when the moon aspects Saturn, which is about 2.5 days, right? 1517 to 1544. It's almost exactly 2.5 degrees.
Well, that's just less than a degree. That's
that's just for 30
Oh,
seconds.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's like 30 minutes or whatever, right?
No, sorry, 30 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I know the timing of things is not easy to me. In Prajna, if I'm just being completely honest, I know there's the other technique that says that, okay, if it's a dual sign, then it's weeks. If it's a movable lagna, it's days. If it's dual, it's weeks. And if it's fixed, it's months. But so that would say that, okay, we're dealing with weeks, and then something about Mercury and Moon, maybe I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to figure out the
He would estimate it from the distance between key planets, and then he would look in the ephemeris and look at the transits and try to identify it
Oh, maybe it could imply less than 1 week then. If it's the moon is aspecting to Saturn within 1 degree and it's a dual sign, maybe that's possible that it's just implying less than a week. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, sure.
But what you said is that seems, yeah, I'll have to keep that idea in mind.
Well, I think Lily would write conjunctions as more significant than the other aspects. So I'm looking at the next aspect the moon makes by conjunction is to Rahu.
Right.
And that's a little over 2 degrees, so a little over 2 days. And then I'd look in the ephemeris for 48 hours later and try to find a time that looks most likely based on the transits.
That's really cool. And I could see that working. I will have to keep that in mind more,
You
that
said it
idea.
took, what, 2.5 days?
Yeah, because it was around that time. I think it was definitely less than 3 days.
Yeah, and he also says you got to use common sense. He uses the same rules. He uses both. Well, this is what it's in Cancer, which is a cardinal sign, so that's rapid.
Right.
But it's in a succedent house, so that slows it down. So rapid could even be hours. It could go hours, days, weeks. Days seems more likely.
Yeah.
Because she's actively searching for it. So common sense says it's probably a matter of days. It's probably not a matter of hours because it's a succedent sign.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably not weeks because it's Cancer, which is a cardinal sign. So
that makes sense.
Maybe 2 to 3 days you should be able to find it based on the conjunction of the moon to Rahu.
Yeah, I think that you guys would probably agree that when it comes to the Horary and Prajna, it's definitely hardest to do the timing of things, I think, in that area. I know, and I hear a lot of great things about John Frawley, and I don't know if he has any other ideas about timing or things like that.
He has a little bit different take than Lily. But I've used Lily's technique in timing, and it doesn't always work. But I remember there was one horary I did for somebody who was looking for work.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me the horary in April, and I basically looked at his significator and when it would conjoin the significator of the 10th house, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me a span, late July, early August, and I looked in the ephemeris and told him, I think I said August 1st, and he got a new job in July, started the new job August 2nd.
Nice.
And then I couldn't understand why the August 1st was wrong, but then I went back and realized August 1st was a Sunday.
Oh, okay.
And so he couldn't have started on the Sunday, had to start on the Monday.
Well, so there you go.
But it worked out very exactly. I was quite impressed.
Yeah, that's good enough, man. If it does it that well, that's good enough. And not every time, but we just have to know a lot of techniques so that we can maybe with a little bit of intuition know which one to use at the right time,
But Lily says you've got to use common sense. You can't just go by the astrology.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like if this said 10 years, probably not.
Yeah. And I was always taught that prajnas generally have like a year-long kind of span to them. It's sort of the same idea as Varshafal and stuff. So if someone asks like, should I move or what would be the result of making this move? That chart is saying like within that year kind of, and if you wait 3 years and then move, you may not have the same, you know what I mean?
I don't think that's true. I think it depends on the question.
Maybe so, yeah.
So years ago, another astrologer, she was interested in writing some books and publishing them, and she asked me, do you think I'll be able to get this book published?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the chart and I said, well, in 3 years' time, December of this year, and that's when it was published. So
that's good. I guess that's different though if you think about it from what I'm saying, because that's a question like, will I do this at some point in my life? Yeah. But I guess I'm saying like, is if they're asking like, will I do this thing, like moving, or should I date this person, or sort of, I don't know. I do feel like there is like a year-long span to it, kind of, if that makes sense, where they might just not have that same opportunity later on. I guess the same idea is like it comes from the Tajika, the Varshafal system. They're all about just that 1 year, the sun, the solar return, the Varshafal. It's kind of all coming from that same system, I guess. You know what I mean? But that makes sense that she would, that would still be correct though, because I guess that's a lifelong kind of question,
Well, the other thing in process, the question really has to be sincere and important.
Yeah.
If someone asks a trivial question like, am I ever going to get married? Well, I mean, that's probably important, but it's not a good question.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. No, it definitely has a lot. That's okay. So in the Vedic text, they have like they have right off the bat these rules to see if the questioner is sincere. You know, do they have that in the
absolutely.
Yeah.
Bonatti has that. Lily has that. I think they got, well, I'm not sure if they got those from the Persian astrologers, but certainly Bonatti starts that way. Bonatti, who wrote, I think, 12th century Italy, he says, often people come just to test me or trick me, to see if it's a bunch of bullshit. And I have to check if it's sincere, and he has his rules. And his rule of thumb was, he says to the client, have you been trying to answer this question on your own and through prayer, because he was very devout? Have you been praying for guidance for at least 24 hours before you ask me the question? And if they said no, he would say, go back, go search for your item, pray, ask for divine help. And if at the end of a full day, 24 hours, you still need my help, come back and I'll do the chart.
I think that was first of the 146 considerations by Bonatti.
Right. He begins his book that way. He says, I don't want these trivial questions. I want really sincere, important questions where they've tried everything else. I'm the last resort. They've even prayed to God in heaven.
Yes.
Haven't gotten an answer. Then come and I'll see what I can do to help.
Okay.
And you know,
God.
May all astrologers watching this have the merit to only have these good clients that are like that. But that's not always the case. But it is also the same idea in Prajna Marga. They say that right off the bat. They say like one should have been contemplating or this question for more than 24 hours before going, or they say something to that effect. I forget the details, but yeah.
But if you look, I look at these Horary groups online, and sometimes there's really trivial questions like,
I know,
I'm going to buy a new car. What color will it be? Things like that. And like,
yeah, it's like you're going to buy it either way. Like,
right. But what color will it be? And then,
yeah, it's like they're just trying to test you. Yeah.
Or just, I mean, I understand if you're a student and you want to test the technique, you're going to ask a lot of silly questions along the line, but you can't expect to get good answers because.
And for those students who might be in that position, this is how I would suggest putting that forth. If you're watching my YouTube channel, don't go, I have Mercury in the fourth. What are the results? I hate that question. Say, I have Mercury in the fourth, and this is what I think about my life. And I have loved playing sport games I've loved kayaking, and it's in a water sign. Do you think that makes sense? Do you think that connects? Then I might get interested and interact with you. But if you're just saying, I have Mercury in the fourth, please predict my life, I'm not interested in doing free work, it's just, it doesn't seem sincere.
I've seen questions where I ordered a package, it hasn't come yet. Do you think it'll come on Friday?
Okay.
Is that, I mean, I suppose if it's like life, you need a life or death medication, it hasn't arrived, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But if it's just Amazon is late, when is my package going to come?
Yeah.
How is that a horary question?
Don't bother the gods about that one.
Right.
Okay.
But right. But it's probably worth doing the chart to see what happens, and you get nonsense, and then you realize that's a stupid question.
It's fun, and do these things on your own, viewers who are watching. Like when your package arrives for your precious book that Ashwin just wrote, and once that arrives, cast a chart, and look at and it might say something cool about it. Yeah.
And I think we are almost towards the end, but I just wanted to ask Corey, so do you use nakshatras in doing Horary? Okay, so if there is one more thing. So Atmakarka is Mercury. So Mercury is Atmakarka, and that pretty much answers a lot of our questions. And
right.
So Atmakarka is the planet that is placed in the highest degrees in the chart for Anthony. If you're not familiar with this concept, so and it's almost like oikodespotes but there are various other ways in which we arrive at this result in terms of.
You're right, Ashwin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to say a little bit about the nakshatras is that I would still do it all that classical Tajik way first, and then when I need more details, I start paying attention to the nakshatras and all. The fact that the fourth lord is in Jesta, a very like conquering, victorious nakshatra, seemed also auspicious and really like, lucky and good for her. And there's something about Punarvasu
and moon is there in Punarvasu. It's Punarvasu is all about repeating patterns, but Punarvasu is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is the fourth lord. So
right, that's what. Yeah, there was a neat connection there I saw, and there was one other thing I can't remember at the moment.
And Rahu is also in Punarvasu. So,
but yeah, always keep in mind those the nakshatra factors as well.
I don't remember the Pushkarana Vamsas by your head, because I think for Jupiter's nakshatras, I think it's second and fourth padas.
I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but
I'm forgetting. But if it is 2 and 4, I think we have moon in very strong position apart from its own dignity, and also Rahu. So.
And also, like you said, Ashwin, it's also, if it's not too confusing to you, you can look at the Makaraka plan and say, oh, Mercury, that's the significator of like what a major significator of what's going on today is, okay, Mercury, the gadgets, the technology, the person, this is what they lost, this Mercury, Moon, Rahu, Cancer thing, a way for them to hang out and interact with people all around the world, network, community, study astrology. And, she's like us, like she studies astrology and is always talking with other astrologers and networking kind of internationally. And that, I think that Mercury, Rahu, Moon speaks a lot to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Anthony, any final thoughts?
No, this was great. I realize a lot I have to learn about Vedic techniques.
There's a lot I want to learn about the Western Hellenistic stuff as well, for sure. So this is fun. So I hope you guys can see that there is a lot of similarity and a lot of confluence. And I love seeing when the charts, when you can use various different systems and see the same thing. Like if you imagine in ancient times, and this was a really big deal, this chart for some reason, they might have called a Nadi astrologer, and they might have called a Hellenistic person, and they might have called an ancient Babylonian astrologer and all these different William Lilly, all these systems, and wouldn't it have been cool to see how many of them all spoke to the same answer?
Cross pollination. So okay. So
thank you.
I think that pretty much brings us towards the end of this discussion. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Ashwin, and really thank you for having me on here, and nice meeting you too, Anthony.
Nice meeting you. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
All right. Take care.